So today is 20th of April, and as always we are going to begin with the analysis of the Hindu newspaper. So we have picked up some very important topics from today's newspaper, and whatever it will be left will be covered throughout the day on our channel. So let's begin with the first topic for today. Okay, so a gene drive is going to take place, and this gene drive and malaria, they have a connection. So 1 second please. So gene drive and malaria, how altered mosquitoes could reshape disease control. So this is an important study that has been ongoing for almost 20 years now, and researchers have found something very interesting. They are actually trying to contain malaria. Malaria, we know, is very infectious, so they are now trying to contain malaria through a new thing, through a new mechanism, and that mechanism is gene drive. Right, so when we talk about malaria, how does it actually spread? So malaria is caused by a parasite, right? Plasmodium, and it is carried through a vector, that's the female Anopheles mosquito, correct? So what happens is that this mosquito, when it sucks the blood of an infected person, this plasmodium enters the body of the mosquito. There also it starts multiplying and starts developing, basically growing. It starts growing into a full-fledged parasite, and then when it moves ahead, when it this vector is going to infect the other person, vector is going to bite the other person, then it is going to inject this plasmodium into that person, into a healthy person. And then how this healthy person is going to react? So this plasmodium is going to multiply within the healthy person, correct? Especially in the liver cells, it is going to multiply, and then it will start growing, it will start multiplying in number, and then finally it will enter the RBCs also, RBCs of the person. Here also it will start multiplying, and eventually it will just burst out the RBCs. It is going to burst the entire RBC. So what will happen? Then you will start seeing these symptoms like chills, fever, anemia, etc. Right. So all these things happen. So that's why researchers were wondering that because these mosquitoes, they are actually just vectors, they are carriers, they're only carrying the disease. So these, what if we try to alter them? What if we try to alter their genes, that they just stop spreading this disease? Right now, how do we contain malaria? We take care of different things that, they should not be breeding in stagnant water. Stagnant water should not be found anywhere. Then we should use mosquito nets and repellents, and we should be wearing full sleeves clothes and everything, so that we basically prevent ourselves from these insect bites, these mosquito bites. So this is how we were doing, we were tackling with the malaria situation. But now the researchers felt that let's try doing something else also. What if the mosquitoes themselves, they stop carrying this vector, they stop carrying this disease, they stop becoming a carrier of this disease? Now how will that happen? For that they came up with something that's known as gene drive. Now the goal over here is transmission zero. Transmission zero meaning that no new infections are being passed from one person to another in a specific area. So whatever infections have already what are already there, we are going to treat them, but no new infections should pass, no new infections should occur. Basically, a disease should not grow. This is what we are trying to achieve with transmission zero. And this idea is now moving closer to reality through a genetic technology called a gene drive. Okay, now this gene drive, it is done through two ways. One is population suppression, and next is the population modification. Whose population are we talking about here? We are talking about the mosquitoes population, because we know that mosquitoes are the carriers. So we are trying to deal with these carriers, that they just stop carrying the disease. So how will that happen? One is population suppression and one is population modification. Now when we talk about population suppression, gene editing is taking place everywhere. Okay, we'll first understand how these two mechanisms are going to work, and then how gene drive works. So through gene editing, we are talking about suppressing the population of mosquitoes. Like, we are going to insert some certain types of genes that will basically make the female mosquitoes sterile or very difficult for them to reproduce. So, or these organs will not be developed fully. Then what will happen? Over a period of time, when the females, they become sterile, then over a period of time, this population is going to decrease. The population of these mosquitoes is going to decrease, and when their population will decrease, then how will they carry the disease anymore? So this is about suppressing the population. It is about killing the mosquitoes basically. It's about killing the entire system that is carrying the disease. So we are focusing on the female mosquitoes over here and making them sterile, so that their reproduction does not work appropriately and they are not able to produce more organisms. So eventually this can actually lead to entire wipeout of the population. But is this the most appropriate way to go about things? We are talking about wiping out the entire population. So this is one thing that is being done in population suppression. We'll talk about the risks also later on. But a better approach over here is population modification, because the problem is not the mosquito. Mosquito is only the carrier. Problem is Plasmodium. So why not deal with that? So how will we deal with that? For that, we are going to use a modification. We are going to insert a gene that will basically not allow that parasite to grow within this mosquito. So it will not allow Plasmodium to grow within mosquito. Now how will that happen? There are these genes. Now when mosquito is going to pick up Plasmodium and the Plasmodium starts growing, this gene is basically going to stop it from growing. It will have some antimicrobial peptides and everything, which will just suppress that Plasmodium to grow. And when the Plasmodium will not grow, then even if this mosquito bites a healthy person, no harm is going to happen to that healthy person, because the Plasmodium did not grow within the body of the mosquito. So here we are going to focus only on Plasmodium. That even if Plasmodium enters the body of the mosquito, it is not allowed to grow. It is not allowed to grow. It will basically be killed, okay, within the system itself. So it will kill Plasmodium and not the mosquito. Here the mosquito will live, only Plasmodium will be killed. But here over a period of time, the entire mosquito population over here, Anopheles mosquito, that population itself will be killed. So this is more sustainable. Population modification is more sustainable, correct? Here we are not wiping out an entire population, wiping out an entire species. So this is a more sustainable way to go about things. Now how will this happen? This is happening through gene drive. These are two things that we are doing through gene drive. But gene drive in general is about a process in which this modified gene is going to copy itself at the normal gene. Now what happens whenever there is an offspring, right? There is a 50-50% chance that the offspring is going to inherit a gene. From mother and from father, there is a 50-50% chance that the offspring will have a gene. Now here we are talking about gene modification, two ways: suppression and modification. Even in suppression, we are inserting a gene, a modified gene that is going to kill the mosquito, and in modification also we are inserting a gene that is going to kill the Plasmodium, correct? In both the cases, we are making use of what? Gene editing through CRISPR-Cas9. So we are making use of this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool, and we are editing the gene. In one case, we are editing a gene that is going to kill the mosquito, and in another case, we are editing the gene that is going to kill the Plasmodium. Now, how will this happen? This is happening because instead of a 50-50 inheritance, generally we have a 50-50% chance that this modified gene, let's say we inserted the modified gene into the mosquito. Now, there is a 50% chance that this modified gene is going to express itself in the offspring, but we want to expedite that. How will we expedite that? In that, through gene drive, what happens is that this modified gene, when it is inserted into the body of the organism, it is going to find the normal gene also, and it is going to copy itself at the place of the normal gene, right? So this gene, this modified gene basically copies itself onto the normal gene, on the site of the normal gene. So then what is going to happen? This 50% chance is going to increase to almost 100% chance, because all the genes are now modified. That normal gene is not existing anymore, because this modified gene found that normal gene, it copied itself in the place of the normal gene. So now the offspring, instead of having a 50% chance of getting the modified gene, almost now has a 100% chance, 80, 90 or 100% chance of getting the modified genes. So this is going to work faster, right? Whatever gene we are talking about, whether it is about killing the mosquito, or whether it is about killing the plasmodium, whatever modification we are talking about, that is going to express itself faster because of the gene drive. So this is something that the researchers have been ongoing. However, the goal over here in the long term, because of the risks associated, will not actually be to kill the entire mosquito species. It would rather be to it would rather be stopping the expression of plasmodium or the growing of plasmodium within that mosquito. Correct? So for that, a study was done in Tanzania also. Like, multiple experiments have been happening, small scale experiments have been happening in these research labs, but Tanzania study is particularly the most important one, because here we already have, it's already a malaria affected zone. So here we could get like real blood samples from the infected children, from the infected people, and then the entire process was simulated, like in a lab itself, how are things going to work. And here we focused on modification, population modification, not population suppression, but population modification. So they took local mosquitoes, Anopheles gambiae, and here they genetically modified them. So they basically inserted a gene that will not allow plasmodium to grow. It will actually kill the plasmodium once it reaches the gut. So they made mosquitoes produce special molecules in their gut, okay, and as soon as plasmodium is going to reach there, it will be killed. These are some antimicrobial peptides that have been that were enabled inside this mosquito, so that as soon as plasmodium reaches there, it will simply kill the plasmodium. And when it will kill the plasmodium, then even if it bites any other human, no plasmodium is going to be inserted, because the plasmodium has been killed. And when that will not happen, malaria will not spread any further. So all these studies have been done, and this is actually a great way to go about things, because right now we have only been focusing on treating the people. Whoever have been infected, we treat them. Then other than treatment, we are focusing that nobody else should acquire the disease, simply by making use of mosquito nets and repellents, and not allowing water to get stagnated at any place. So these are the precautions. These are basically precautionary measures. But here we are trying to focus on the problem itself. The problem is the carrier. Problem is the entire carrier system. So if we focus on the carrier system, if we make modifications there, it will be easier for us to control this disease. However, there are certain risks also that are associated, and that risk is that nature can fight back. Now we are talking about making this huge kind of a modification. Now in this, the nature can definitely fight back. There can be some alterations, there can be some modifications that can be made in the mosquito. Naturally, some modifications can start coming up in the mosquito. Then what will happen? Because we are trying to do certain things artificially, we are trying to do a gene modification artificially. So the nature can definitely fight back in its own ways. Then ecological risk will also be there. Ecological risk, particularly in the case of population suppression, correct? Because here we are talking about wiping out the entire species, entire Anopheles species. So an ecological risk is also going to be there. The food chain is going to be affected based on that. Their own ecological system is going to be affected based on that. And how ethical is it for humans to actually decide which species should live and which species should not? So ecological risk is there, ethical risk is also there. And then irreversibility. We have modified the gene and inserted it. So there is an irreversibility. You cannot just undo that process. So if something that has not been calculated for, something that has not really been taken into consideration just comes up, how are we going to deal with that? So that's why right now these small scale experiments are being carried out, but in the long run we want to do that. So but it is going to be an irreversible process. So we'll first have to identify all the problems that can come up by us doing so, and only then we can talk of implementing such things. But it's an important study. We need to understand what a gene drive is, what are the different ways that we are thinking of containing malaria. So it's population suppression and it's population modification. Okay, so this was one important article. Okay, is the voice audible? Right. All right. Now moving on to the second one. Second one says India's crude oil imports have declined nearly 17% in March. Now, our crude oil imports have declined. Why do you think they have declined? They have declined because of the disruptions that we see in West Asia, because of the conflict that we see in West Asia. The Strait of Hormuz closed, open, these kinds of things are happening, blockades are there. So naturally the disruption is taking place, and because of that, our imports have declined by nearly 17% in March. So year on year basis, when it's evaluated, last year in March, whatever we imported, we have imported 17% less than that in this year's March. So this is something that's happening because of the conflict that is ongoing, because of the war that is ongoing, and we'll discuss further what is the current stance on Strait of Hormuz. But we know that Strait of Hormuz is a global energy corridor. 20% of the global energy transit is happening through that route. So because there are disruptions there, because there are disruptions in the Red Sea, our import from the Middle East has fallen down. However, we are looking at diversifying our options, but Middle East has been one of the most important places from where we import our crude oil, and we are 85 to 90% dependent on import itself. So that's why right now we have seen a decline. So in the first full month of the lasting West Asia crisis, our imports have declined by 17% on an year-on-year basis in March this year. However, if we talk about our imports of liquefied natural gas, they have spurred more than 20%. So crude oil has declined, but liquefied natural gas, that has increased by 20%. Why? Simply because we are looking for alternatives. We want liquefied natural gas, we want PNG. So we want these supplies for our household cooking, we want them for our transport sector, we want them for our factories, for our industries, and we cannot simply be relying only on crude oil because the situation is not great at the moment. So in that case, what are we going to do? We want to look for alternatives. That is exactly what we are doing. Liquefied natural gas, then PNGs are there. So we are looking at these alternatives, and because of that, this import has seen an increase, whereas this import, the crude oil import, has seen a decrease of 17%. Then if we talk about some other data over here, so this import definitely has seen an increase. We are at the same time looking at diversifying our options. So instead of with Middle East, we are now relying more on what? More on Russia, more on Western African countries. We are doing all of that, and at the same time we are also looking at improving our own options, like becoming self-reliant, relying more on renewable energy. Because if we only start, if we only keep relying on crude oil, and we are always going to be import dependent for crude oil, so it is better that we start looking for alternatives. So right now this import has gone up, but the crude oil import has declined. And when this declines, now in the short term, our bill will also be reduced. The import bill also has been reduced by 4.9% at the moment. However, this is not something that is going to be sustainable in the long run. But yes, in the short run, we have seen a certain decline in our import bill also, because we're importing less. But at the same time, other imports are increasing. Other types of alternatives are coming up. Other diversification is happening. So these things will keep on happening as until this conflict is not resolved, or we actually reach a situation where some sort of a negotiation, peace negotiation, starts coming into picture, and the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea and these areas are actually not disrupted anymore. And till the time disruptions are going to continue, such kind of things will happen. So it is best in Indian interest that we start looking for diversified markets, and at the same time looking at more of the renewable energy options. Okay. Now moving on to another important news, which says that Uttar Pradesh's minimum wage has been changed. So what does this minimum wage change mean for the other states of the country, and what is this minimum wage? Why has this been changed? So you know that there were protests ongoing, particularly in Noida, Ghaziabad, and all these areas. They have basically these protests. In a response to these protests, the government has decided to revise. UP government has decided to revise its minimum wage. So the government issued a crucial notification on April 17 in regard to the revision of minimum wage in the state as an interim step with retrospective effect from April 1, 2026. So the minimum wages have been increased, and they are going to be applied retrospectively from April 1st itself. And under the Minimum Wages Act, minimum wages are reviewed periodically, taking into account the All India CPI. Now, what is entirely happening over here? There were protests. I told you the workers were unhappy. They wanted better living conditions, better working conditions. They wanted better pay for their work. So for this, in a response, the UP government has increased its minimum wage. Now, this minimum wage, what exactly is the minimum wage? Minimum wage is the least amount or the least legal amount that an employer can pay to its employees. So it's actually the most basic amount or the lowest amount that an employer can pay to the employee. So these minimum wages are actually decided by the states, by the state government. And another thing to note over here is that the minimum wage can never be below the floor wage. So there are two types of wages, okay, floor wage and minimum wage. Floor wage is something that is decided by the central government. It is notified by the central government. Floor wage is actually the national baseline. You can say it's the baseline for wages, that below this no wage can exist. So the minimum wage also has to be either equal to the floor wage or greater than the floor wage. It can never be lower than the floor wage. So based on that, like based on the floor wage, all the different states, they come up with their minimum wages. And these minimum wages are also categorized into three areas. So we have skilled workers, semi-skilled workers and unskilled workers. So based on their skill of work, wages are decided, minimum wages are decided. So that's what the UP government did. It came up with these wages, these minimum wages for skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled workers. And when any state is deciding the minimum wage, they also take into consideration the CPI, All India Consumer Price Index. Why? So this minimum wage will actually have two components. One will be the basic pay, the base wage, and then VDA, Variable Durance Allowance. Basic plus VDA. Now basic is the base wage which will remain unchanged, which will be paid to everybody, and VDA is the variable durance allowance. This is actually the price or the amount that government fixes based on inflation, because the inflation is happening, prices will rise. So prices, cost of living is going to rise, cost of your food, of your fuel, of your rent, everything is going to rise. So in order to take into account all such changes, the government also considers the data of CPI and then it makes certain adjustments. A VDA is decided, which is added to the base pay, and then that in total makes up the minimum wage. So the government, while deciding the minimum wage, also takes into consideration the inflation, and for that it has the All India Consumer Price Index. Okay. So this notification has been made under the Minimum Wages Act 1948 using powers under the United Provinces Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. So this act, it basically categorizes the state into three different areas. Like we have three categories, category 1, 2 and 3. So these categories are nothing but the division of state based on their economic conditions, their cost of living conditions. So category 1 is going to have these areas like Gautam Budh Nagar or Ghaziabad, where the cost of living is higher, or it's basically the industrial hub. Most of the industries are situated here. So here the minimum wages are going to be different. Then category 2 will have areas which have municipal corporations. There the wages are going to be different. And then category 3 will have rest of the state. There the wage is going to be different. So in each of these categories we are going to have skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled wages, but it is actually because the living conditions are not the same everywhere, like it's not uniform throughout the state. So we have to make these categories. The UP government has these three categories, and based on their the industrialization of that area or the cost of living of that area, wages are decided. But it is important for us to understand what a minimum wage is, what a floor wage is, who decides what, and what are the things that are taken into consideration. So inflation is also taken into consideration, and as a response to the protests that were ongoing in Noida, in Ghaziabad, these things have happened. Now, because this has happened, what kind of an implication can it have on rest of the states of India? So it can also act as a benchmark, because UP is the most populous state. It has a lot of population. It has a lot of migrant population also. People come to UP, people go out of UP also for work. So these wages are actually going to decide how many people will stay here and how many people will leave. And it can also act as a benchmark for other states also, like what is UP doing? Are the wages given over here better than the wages that they are providing? So will the people feel more motivated to go to UP? Will the people, will the laborers who are living in UP feel more motivated to stay here, or they would want to go out, they would want to migrate? So these are some implications that can happen. However, it can act majorly, it can act as a benchmark for the other states to see what UP is doing and is it working in its favor or not, and is that something that they can also borrow, right? So this is what's happening in Uttar Pradesh. And lastly, we have a news that is related to the Strait of Hormuz, in which Iran has fully closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now the situation is so unstable that just 1 or 2 days ago, Iran had said that it's not going to close Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz will remain open, and President Trump even said that Iran has vowed that in future also it will never use, Iran will never use Strait of Hormuz as a leverage. It will never block the Strait of Hormuz, and it will always remain functional for the world to for the world to basically carry on their transport. But just a day after that, we see that Iran has again fully closed Strait of Hormuz, because it feels that President Trump's blockade is a little too much. That Navy blockade is affecting Iran a lot. The peace negotiations are not coming into any conclusion. Nothing is happening, and the negotiations are basically getting very hard. It's getting difficult to get onto a conclusion. So Iran in response has said that it has fully closed now the Strait of Hormuz. So the situation again becomes very unstable. That's why it is important for countries like India to actually start diversifying their options. Because of things like this, we have actually seen this import decline by 17%, right? So this is something that's happening. Now, until and unless a proper peace talks start happening, the second round of peace talks, they start happening, and both parties actually get onto the table and come to a conclusion, nothing can really happen. These kinds of things will keep on happening. The blockade will be there, then the strait will be closed and the strait will be opened. But this in turn is going to affect, and it is actually affecting the entire world, because 20%, it's not a small amount, 20% of the global energy transit is happening through this strait only. So Iran has actually said that the strait will remain closed until the US blockade is lifted. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy said on Saturday night, warning that no vessel should make any movement from its anchorage in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman, and approaching the Strait of Hormuz will be considered as cooperation with the enemy. Who is the enemy? The US, and will be targeted. So the things are not very friendly at the moment, and in fact one of the ships that was one of the Indian ships, also merchant ships, they were also targeted over here. In fact, earlier earlier Iran had actually allowed India to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but here we saw that one of the Indian ships was also targeted. So these things are happening, and Iran is saying that until the naval blockade that Trump has placed on Iran, that is going to lift up, nothing will happen, and the strait will remain closed. And this is coming just one day after the strait being actually open. So these are the things that are happening, and that's why India is looking at diversifying the options, which is very much need of the hour, diversifying our crude oil options, import options, and most importantly relying more and more on our renewable energy sources. So that was all for today's discussion. We'll move to the practice question. I hope you enjoyed the discussion so far. Now, before we talk about the practice question, let me tell you that we have this course for you, which is the Studio GS Foundation live online course. So this is a foundation course, so your prelims and main syllabus will be covered. You'll get 1250 plus hours of classes, printed class notes, live chat facility, and a complete syllabus coverage in 14 months. Okay. Also 3 mediums, Hindi, English, and English, that you can choose from. And all of this you'll get at 34,999 rupees only. And if you wish to avail a further discount on this fee, then you know you have to use a coupon code, which is SALONI, Saloni, all in capital letters, and you will get the maximum discount for yourself. So don't wait, admissions are already open. There is a helpline number that you can call at 87501 87501, and you can also download the Drishti Learning app. Right? Now let's conclude with our practice question. With reference to gene drives, consider the following statements. 1. Gene drives increase the probability of a gene being inherited by offspring beyond the normal 50% rule. 2. Gene drives can be used to either reduce mosquito populations or make mosquitoes incapable of transmitting diseases. 3. Gene drives work only in plants and have no application in animals or insects. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A 1 and 2 only, B 2 only, C 1 and 3 only, or D 1, 2 and 3? So please attempt this question and provide your answers in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and we will meet tomorrow in a new video.